Hey, what's up, comrades? Hope everybody's doing great. We're here to talk about, I don't know what to call this fucking thing. It's like Untamed Universe or something. It is bizarro, and it comes in hard and strong. Oops, what happened here? There it goes. So it includes Uncanny X-Men 190, 191, and 192, I'm pretty sure. And the New Mutants are there, also Spider-Man, and also the Avengers. And so we start off, and we see New York. It looks like it's a prison state, and there's some commentary about that and whatnot. And then we see New York as it currently is, and it looks like I don't know, Shangri-La. It's got there's a magical barrier around it, and then everything's been transformed into some sort of like medieval kind of Byzantium/Arabic community. And then we jump over to Washington, D.C., and we see Valerie Cooper talking to Henry Gyrick and a bunch of the people about what's going on. So there's this magical barrier put up, and anytime anyone enters, like they sent soldiers, they transform into like these Arabian Nights, essentially. And then if they leave, they don't, and then they forget everything about what they're there for, but they still have some of their purpose and whatnot. And then we get an overview of this guy, Kulan Gath, who's a Spider-Man villain, I think. And then we see like some of the Avengers, like Star Fox, Wasp, Captain America, Vision, Scarlet Witch, all in there, plus the X-Men, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Storm, Rogue, and then Spider-Man's there. And Spider-Man somehow is completely unaffected, possibly because he's a Spider-Man villain. And then there's some back and forth about mutants being degenerates or whatever moral panic of the day is. And then this like general who like rescued people from like concentration camps in Nazi Germany loses his shit. We then jump over to Aurora, who wakes up on a ship, and she's like, the fuck's going on here? And then this asshole like bursts in, and he's led by Callisto, who's a Morlock, and the Morlocks are Kulan Gath's like force. So Kulan Gath like found them. He mindfucked them so that they all obey him, and they're like his personal guard or whatnot. And they're about to brand Aurora and take him back to Kulan Gath when she is able to escape. And then her and Callisto like race after each other on the ship, and the ship like gets set on fire and all this stuff. And eventually Callisto cuts Aurora, but then Aurora grabs her, and they both dive into the water. And when they dive into the water, they float outside the realm of the magical barrier, and then they both remember what's going on. And then Aurora is able to get the attention of like a Navy ship that rescues them both. We then jump back over to Kulan Gath, and he is doing some sort of insane magic. Like he's got Doctor Strange all locked up with some bizarro magic, and he is showing him that he can combine Caliban with Professor X and utilize him as like his slave. And he talks about that, and then the New Mutants get brought before them, and Kulan Gath tells them that he's gonna like control them, and that Professor X has already joined them, and that they should join too. Warlock right now is pretending to be like a human, and he's observing, and he's completely unaffected as he's like an alien creature. And we learn around here that some other sorcerer magical type characters are also unaffected, and then Spider-Man specifically. So the New Mutants attack Warlock as he tries to save them because they're under the influence of Kulan Gath and Professor X, and he like nopes the fuck out of there. Professor X isn't able to help with Warlock because there's still so many unknown factors about him. And then we see Selene kind of watching from like the dark corner, and she's unaffected as well because she's like an ancient witch and whatnot. She does go and find Rachel and Amara, who are not with the rest of the New Mutants per like the last time we saw them out and about doing like shopping and hanging out and stuff. And she rescues them and then kind of like enthralls them. Meanwhile, Aurora and Callisto are on the ship in the Hudson River talking about what to do and talking about how they need to escape and figure out what's going on and whatnot. And they're back to like the regular selves, and they have some fun banter about how they could be friends, but they can't because of life situations or whatever. Then Selene like reaches out to them and kind of explains the situation and how she needs their help. And Aurora's like, all right, let's go. And Callisto's like, can we trust her? And Aurora's like, fuck no. We got to go figure out what's going on. And so they escape, and they run away from like this little area they're being held in like Hoboken or something, I don't know. And they make it to the sewers, and they start heading back in. Meanwhile, we see Spider-Man just like running around, getting chased. He eventually runs into the Avengers, who have forgotten who they are, but they think they're noble. And he's being chased. Spider-Man's being chased by the New Mutants. So then a brawl erupts, and the X-Men show up, and we see Ileana Rasputin, who's also a mage, who's slightly unaffected. She's lost her memory, but she's not under the control of Kulan Gath necessarily. Anyway, Colossus is, but then Ileana is able to hit him with her soul sword, which makes her not. And then we see Aurora and Callisto, they are also being attacked by guys in the sewers. And so there's a whole bunch of fight. And eventually Selene pops in and like destroys the enemy, and Captain America's not too keen about that. But because Selene's shown herself, Kulan Gath like captures her and then threatens these guys and sends more brutes to like fight them, but they're able to follow Callisto down in the sewers. We then head back over to Kulan Gath. He's with Selene tied up, and then the abomination that is Professor X and Caliban. And they go back and forth for a bit and talk about what's going on. And she's like not unafraid of this asshole and everything that's going on. And then we have like a nice little like sit down by the fire, and Rachel and Amara are thinking about joining Kulan Gath. But the rest of them are excited that they're not a member, and they're going to fight, and they're going to save everyone and do what they can to protect everybody. We continue into issue 191, where we have Spider-Man chained up against the wall because he got caught in that previous battle. And we get kind of like a quick recap of everything that's going on. And Spider-Man and what is his name? Kulan Gath go back and forth about everything that's going on. And then Spider-Man gets tortured some more. Meanwhile, Selene talks back to Kulan Gath, and then she gets turned into some bizarre like tentacle monster with no mouth. Danny Moonstar and Sunder get punished for not being able to capture the rest of the rebels, and then the Xavier creature rolls in and tells them that stuff's going to happen. One of the things that the other people that got captured during this little raid, no, that's not yet. Okay, so then the rest of the crew is entering some sort of library to kind of figure out what's going on to get more information about Kulan Gath when they get attacked. And they get attacked. At first, they find a bunch of dead bodies, and then they find like the chief librarian, and she's screaming at them for killing everybody. And Aurora's like, "We didn't kill anybody." And then Scarlet Witch and Vision attack with like a crew of Morlocks or whatever, and there's like a fight. Ro gets stabbed and killed after she loses her superpowers. Aurora goes nuts, and everyone else like nopes out of there to escape. Nuts is in berserk, just killing dudes and fighting. Warlock hops in, rescues Aurora, and then takes her away to kind of talk and figure stuff out. Meanwhile, Ileana calls out Amara for not using her volcano powers to like help or whatnot, and then Captain America finds that odd as well, that the whole situation, he's like thinking about it and whatnot. In the melee, Warlock ended up killing Rain, but Kulan Gath is able to help her. And we see Eros and Wasp, who are members of the Avengers, they get transformed into like other forms. Up on top of the building, Warlock is trying to communicate with Aurora, but there's something about being here where they speak a different language than English, and Warlock's trying to translate and figure stuff out, so he's using like images and whatnot. Underground, the archivist is talking about Kulan Gath and about his history, about how he was involved with some like Thoth Amon, and then he was supposed to be like a magician ruler, but then stuff kept happening, like Spider-Man more currently and stuff. And they come up with a plan. So Amara and Rachel are going to pretend to be captured, and then Colossus and Captain America are going to sneak on in by, using Rachel's deceit and whatnot. Meanwhile, Callisto and Ileana, Nightcrawler, and the Archivist are going to go underground. And so there begins to be a bunch of different battles going on. And at some point, Ileana is able to start getting the New Mutants with her soul sword to release them from like their bondage. Callisto ends up killing Sunder, which is unfortunate because they're like homies. Meanwhile, we see that Spider-Man has gone from being chained up to being crucified. And then everyone starts meeting up for like a big brouhaha. Colossus gets killed by Vision. Eros hypnotizes Rachel and Amara. And then Captain America gets knocked down. And then the group from the basement, Callisto and Ileana and Nightcrawler, they get turned to stone by the Scarlet Witch, and Spider-Man's like had enough, so he pulls himself off the crucifixion and goes to like take the amulet. And then at this point I'm like, oh, the amulet, that must be where all these powers come from. If you remember, there was like that homie, the fishmonger guy, who found the amulet like in the fish. So I guess that's where this guy came from. Like he possessed that guy and like took back his powers or whatever. And so Spider-Man and Warlock both identify separately in different areas that the amulet is what needs to be taken care of. And so back up on the roof, Warlock's finally able to get Aurora on board with everything that's going on. And so then they fly in and they're able to tear off the amulet, but then it gets taken by Amara, and it's like, Amara, what the fuck? And then Amara is actually Selene the whole time. Oh no, it was all deceit and trickery. And so then Warlock and Aurora get blasted, and Warlock's like, I can't help. I'm dying, but I can infest you with like my techno virus, like, and that you can survive and you can do that. And so he does, and Aurora turns into like one of his species, and then he infests Selene, and so then everything's like cleared up because Selene killed Kulan Gath, and now it's like, all right, everyone's good to go. And then Doctor Strange showed up, and he's like, Jesus Christ. Like, I gotta fix this shit. And he's like, it's impossible to fix any of this stuff, but I can use Ileana's like time traveling powers to like reset to before this all happened, and then we can make it like not happen or whatever. So he does that, and then there's a lot of conversation about like what it means to have like transported back in time before this whole like these last two issues occurred, and like the ramifications for that, and like what's going to change and all this stuff, and like and then like no one's going to remember anything that happened but the people in this room, and the people in this room are Ileana, Professor X, Aurora, Captain America, Strange, and the Archivist Lady. I think I see somebody else, maybe Callisto, and Caliban are there too, I think. That's what it looks like. And so Aurora it like wonders about what dire circumstances, like did they save the world or save everybody, or did they make things worse in the end? And then we switch back over to the fishmonger guy, and he's got his necklace, and he's about to be stabbed when this like crazy looking like robot shows up and blasts the shit out of the guy about to stab him. The guy then drops necklace into like a bunch of goo at like the bottom of like the train station or whatever, and then there's like, you know, no more Kulan Gath, that solved that problem. And then this creature, the robot, like picks up Rodriguez or whatever his name is, and is like, mutants, I am here to destroy all of them, my name is Nimrod, dun dun dun. Moving on, before we move on, we're just going to include this little side story, kind of transitionary. It's called Fun Games. Excellent. So we start off with some sort of like tag that Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Rogue are playing. They're going back and forth. Nightcrawler is beating him up because he can teleport and stuff. And, you know, we find out he's like the new leader of the X-Men now that Aurora is no longer. And Rogue's being kind of a sourpotamus. And Nightcrawler like teases her, tickles her. She like almost smashes him to death. And then he like teases her some more by like going in for a kiss, and then she like freaks out and runs away. And then Colossus and Nightcrawler kind of remember that, like, you know, before she could get her first kiss, her powers came into action, so she was never able to do that. They then see this super bright light and everything goes white. Meanwhile, over at the airport, Professor X and Aurora and Ileana are picking up Wolverine and Kitty Pryde from their travels in Japan. So they talk a little bit about the anti-mutant sentiment, everything that's going on with that. Ileana's got a sleepy, what's his fucking name? Lockheed. And then we see Rachel just like looking in a mirror because she came along too, and like thinking about her past and stuff. And then all of a sudden she wakes up like in the past, or in the future, her future past. And she's wearing like her crazy black outfit with the hunter, and there's Kitty Pryde pretending to be Carol Danvers, and they like breaking into like this area so she can send her back in time. And at some point Kitty Pryde makes some comment about Dark Phoenix, right? And so and they talk about the Nimrod program, which Nimrod's the guy from the end of the last issue, right? So there's clearly some stuff that occurred with the Kulan Gath situation. Kitty then like is like, hey, you okay? And Rachel like wakes back in like the past present, and then they like everyone's hugging it out and thinking and talking about it, and then at some point Kitty turns around and she's like, I know you're Rachel from when, you know, Kitty changed positions with her past, present, future self thing from the Days of Future Past. All right, headed back over to Nightcrawler and Colossus. They work their way over to like this crater where like the thing was attacked, and they start noticing stuff that reminds them of Warlock and where Warlock came to Earth. And then we jump back over to Rogue, and she wakes up and there's Magus, Warlock's father. And so they go back and forth fighting a little bit, and then she breaks one of his arms and he freaks the fuck out. And then Colossus and Nightcrawler come in and they bash him with like a chimney, and then Colossus is beating the shit out of him, and then Nightcrawler like teleports away with part of his leg, which causes him like the most immense pain he's ever felt in his entire life. And then Rogue goes and she's like beating the shit out of him some more at some point, but then she goes in to like get his powers, and so she kisses him, and then she does like a temporary transformation into like a Warlock character. By the time Colossus and Nightcrawler grab her, Magnus like makes himself like a giant projection and is like, get me my son or you will all die, and then he like disappears. A bit later on, Aurora, the rest of the X-Men have shown up, and they're talking about like, if Magnus is so powerful and all this stuff, why didn't he just like take care of business here? Like, why did he nope out of there instead of like actually finishing his job? And there's some back and forth about Nightcrawler being the new leader and how he feels about that. And then a police guy finds him, and so Professor X like makes everybody invisible, and they head out of there. And then we see that Magnus is watching, and he's like, man, they almost killed the shit out of me. And I see that humans on this sphere like destroyed Galactus. This is going to be so much fun. I'm so excited for like the hunt. But we'll see what happens with that. And the final little send-off is Professor X has started teaching at Columbia University in New York, and he's finished one of his lectures, and he's saying goodbye to his students, and then he sees a sign that like all mutants must die, and then he gets attacked by these guys, and he tries to freeze them with his mind stuff, but then he gets hit with a brick anyway, and then they beat the shit out of him like he's bleeding all over the ground. And then it starts to snow, and then we see this character from like an alleyway come out and grab him and like drag him away. And then we get like the Merry Christmas card that was left behind. That's like peace on earth, goodwill to men from all the writers of the X-Men. And that wraps up this short little deviance. The Kulan Gath, and then like a transition to new stuff based on the Kulan Gath time travel shenanigans. And then next time we pick up with the X-Men, we were going to talk about the annuals for 1984 for the Mutants and the X-Men, and then do a couple Marvel team-ups, kind of wrap up this section. Or to wrap up 1984 and move on to 1985 with the next series. So go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.